Every town has a place like Benny's Diner. In Cedar Falls, it sat at the corner of Main Street and Veterans Boulevard, a small, checkered floored refuge where the smell of bacon and coffee masked the silence no one dared to break. Each morning at precisely 800 a.m., Corporal Emily Carter rolled through the glass door in her wheelchair, the bell above giving its familiar chime. Most people barely looked up. Some nodded politely. Others just turned back to their eggs and newspapers. But there was one table, table 6, that noticed her every time, and not with respect. Emily Carter, 42, was a decorated Army combat medic. She had completed 3 tours overseas and saved dozens of lives under fire. A roadside bomb in Kandahar had claimed both her legs and ended her military career, but not her spirit. What remained was a grit, grace, and a pair of prosthetic legs she had long since traded for the efficiency of her chair. Though the uniform was gone, the courage remained tucked behind her steady green eyes and firm jaw. Yet none of that seemed to matter to Brad Wallace, a smug college sophomore who always occupied table 6 with his loudmouthed friends. Son of a local business tycoon, Brad had never known discomfort, let alone sacrifice. Each morning, the group mocked Emily from behind their plates of waffles and cheap bravado jokes about Umara, wheelchair warriors, snide remarks about playing the hero, and questions about whether she got her discount because of the pity points. The cruelty was constant and casual like a ritual. Brad's latest jab, "Hey, maybe she parks here because the wheels match the furniture." Laughter followed, but it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut deep in the quiet where the worst wounds often do. Emily never responded. She focused on her black coffee and dry wheat toast, trying to hold onto a sliver of routine, a tiny rebellion against despair. Her silence was not weakness, it was survival. But the absence of support from the other patrons stung almost more than the ridicule. People kept their heads down. Even Benny, the aging owner behind the counter, avoided eye contact. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted to be next. What those diners didn't know was that Emily wasn't just sipping coffee, she was bracing herself. Each day she showed up was a fight for dignity, a quiet stand that most people couldn't see. But change was coming. And very soon the town of Cedar Falls would have no choice but to look up and recognize the hero they'd ignored for far too long. It was a Tuesday morning like any other, until it wasn't. Corporal Emily Carter had rolled into Benny's Diner just past 800 a.m., like she had done for the last 6 months, trying to hold on to something steady in a life forever altered by war. She had faced gunfire, blood, and loss in Afghanistan, but nothing stung quite like the indifference of her own hometown. And this morning, the cruelty reached a breaking point. Brad Wallace and his buddies were already seated at table 6, nursing coffees they didn't need and ego they hadn't earned. Emily barely made it to her usual spot near the window before Brad's voice rang out across the diner. "Hey, maybe someone should ask Robo-Soldier how she's feeling today." "Probably doesn't matter, doubt she can feel anything from the knees down." His friends cackled on cue. A sugar packet flew through the air and landed on her lap. For a brief moment, the entire diner went silent. Even the jukebox stopped mid-track as if it too refused to play soundtrack to such disrespect. Emily didn't flinch. She looked down at the packet, brushed it off, and reached for her coffee with the same quiet resilience she had leaned on since the day she lost her legs. But inside, something broke, something small, something tired. She began to gather her things, thinking this might finally be the morning that sent her back into hiding. That's when the bell above the door rang again. In walked Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, followed closely by 5 other soldiers in full dress uniform, their boots tapping out a steady rhythm on the black and white tiled floor. The air shifted instantly. Conversations died. Chairs stopped creaking. Coffee cups were lowered without a sip. The soldiers moved with quiet precision until they reached Emily's table, forming a semicircle of respect and strength around her. Torres stepped forward, removed his cap, and offered a sharp salute. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm but warm. "Corporal Carter, we've been looking for you." Emily blinked, confused. "I don't understand." "Your son, Specialist Daniel Carter, sent us. He said you were the strongest soldier he's ever known, and that it was time the rest of us met the woman who taught him what honor really means." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The words struck deep. Her son, deployed with the 82nd Airborne. Her pride, her heart, and the only person who truly knew the battles she'd fought both on the battlefield and within herself. Private First Class Sarah Chen stepped forward, cradling a small wooden box in her hands. "Your son asked us to present you with this," she said, offering it to Emily. "It's from all of us, from Bravo Company." Emily opened the box slowly. Inside was a large custom-made challenge coin, heavy in the palm, detailed in silver and brass. One side bore the airborne insignia. The other had been engraved with care, "Cérémoire." "To Corporal Emily Carter, hero, mother, warrior, your sacrifice echoes through generations." The silence in the diner turned solemn. Not awkward, not confused, just reverent. Even Brad Wallace, who had seconds earlier been laughing at her expense, now sat pale and silent. His friends stared at the table, unable to meet a single gaze. No one reached for their coffee. No one moved. Staff Sergeant Torres turned to the room, his voice now louder, clear as a bell. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet a true American hero. Corporal Emily Carter served 3 tours as a combat medic in Afghanistan. She saved 17 lives under fire. She earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. And she lost both her legs shielding wounded soldiers from an IED. Gasps echoed around the room. The truth so long ignored was now undeniable. Torres continued, eyes sweeping across every table. While some sit comfortably and laugh at others, Corporal Carter lives every day with the scars of bravery. She didn't lose her legs in a car accident. She gave them willingly in service to the very freedoms we all enjoy in this room. At that, even Benny, the old owner, came out from behind the counter. His hands shook as he removed his cap and bowed his head. Emily didn't speak. Her eyes were wet, her hands trembling slightly, but her posture remained firm. Strong, unapologetic. She hadn't asked for this moment, hadn't expected it, but it had arrived like justice on polished boots. Torres turned back to Emily and said quietly, "He wanted you to know you're not alone, ma'am. Not today. Never." As the soldiers stood at attention, a single clap rang out from the back of the diner. It was from a young boy no older than 8. He stood on his chair and began to applaud. Slowly, others joined in. One by one, he went. Every person in Benny's diner stood, servers, patrons, even Brad Wallace, and clapped. Not for show, not out of guilt, but out of long overdue recognition. Emily looked around at the sea of faces. Some were tearful, some ashamed, but all were changed. She had come in for coffee. She left with her head high, surrounded by the family she didn't know she had. The weight of silence in Benny's diner was nearly unbearable. The soldiers stood motionless in their semicircle around Corporal Emily Carter, while patrons remained on their feet, applauding the woman they had once barely acknowledged. Yet amid the rising tide of honor and recognition, Brad Wallace sat stiff in his booth, his eyes darting between the uniformed figures, and the crowd now celebrating the very woman he had mocked for months. His face was flushed, whether from shame, anger, or fear, no one could tell. But as the applause began to taper, Brad couldn't help himself. The entitlement that had always shielded him spoke louder than his conscience. "This is ridiculous," he blurted, his voice cracking with a mix of panic and pride. The room froze. So she was in the military. Big deal. Lots of people served. That doesn't mean we all have to treat her like some kind of saint. His tone turned defensive. She chose to be there. She knew the risks. Why should the rest of us walk on eggshells just because she got hurt doing her job? The hush that followed was absolute. Conversations halted mid-word. Forks hovered over plates. Even the coffee maker behind the counter seemed to grow quiet, as though the room itself were holding its breath. Brad, emboldened by the discomfort he had always thrived on, leaned back as if he had made a compelling argument. But what came next unraveled every ounce of false confidence he carried. Emily turned slowly in her wheelchair to face him. Her expression was unreadable. Not angry, not wounded, but steady, resolved. Her voice when she spoke was soft, but it carried through the room like a bell. "You're right," she said. "I did choose to serve." Brad's eyes narrowed. He expected a rebuttal, maybe tears or raised voices. What he got instead was truth undeniable and heavy. "I chose to leave my son when he was just 9 months old to deploy to Kandahar. I chose to run toward mortar fire when others were pinned down, not because I wanted glory, but because I couldn't live with myself if someone died and I hadn't tried to save them. I chose to crawl into burning wreckage, to pull out a wounded soldier I'd never met. And on March the 3rd, 2018, I chose to shield 2 bleeding Marines with my own body when I saw the IED under our convoy. I knew it was going to explode. I knew it would cost me my legs. She paused, letting that last line settle like a stone in still water. But I also knew, she continued, her voice unwavering, that those two men had families, wives, children, parents. And if my body could spare them from a folded flag and a graveside ceremony, then it wasn't even a question. I made that choice, and I'd make it again. All around, her eyes brimmed with tears, some from sorrow, others from admiration. No one dared move. Even the soldiers remained perfectly still, as if saluting without raising their hands. I didn't ask for pity, Emily added, glancing at the crowd. I never wanted to be seen as broken. But I also didn't expect to be laughed at by boys who've never seen anything more violent than a bar fight. I came here every morning to feel human, to remember who I was before war changed me. And yes, her eyes met Brad's, tried to take that from me. Not with fists, but with words. And sometimes that's worse. Brad's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. There was no comeback, no smirk, only a growing realization of the weight of what he had done and the kind of strength it took to endure it. Emily took a deep breath and added one final thought. You don't have to thank me, you don't have to stand, but you do have to understand freedom isn't free. And sometimes it rolls into this diner in a wheelchair, still bleeding from battles you'll never fight. For a heartbeat, the silence was so profound it echoed. Then the smallest sound broke it, a soft clap, hesitant but firm. It came from a young woman near the window. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the diner erupted into a thunderous standing ovation, louder and more heartfelt than before. Even those who had remained neutral for months now clapped until their palms stung. And slowly, almost reluctantly, Brad stood up. His eyes welled with tears. His hands trembled. But he clapped too, not out of obligation, but because something in him had shifted, something real. Benny, the diner's owner, stepped forward and placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. Ma'am, he said, you just reminded us all what courage really looks like. And for the first time in a long while, Emily smiled, not the practiced, polite smile she wore out of habit, but one born of something deeper. Respect, redemption, and the quiet pride of being seen. As Corporal Emily Carter wheeled herself toward the exit of Benny's diner, the standing ovation still echoed behind her like a drumbeat of long overdue gratitude. The bell above the door gave a soft chime, but what waited outside would resound far louder in her heart. Blinking against the morning sunlight, she stopped short. There, standing in crisp formation along Main Street, were nearly 30 soldiers in full-dress uniform. Their boots were polished to mirror-finish shine, their posture straight, their expressions solemn. And at the center, eyes locked on hers, stood her son, Sergeant Liam Carter, his hands clasped behind his back, his chest adorned with the patches and ribbons of the 82nd Airborne. The gasps of the townspeople gathered on the sidewalk blended with the soft whir of news cameras setting up. Word had spread fast from diner patrons' social media posts to the local TV stations, arriving to capture whatever was unfolding in Cedar Falls. But for Emily, the only thing she truly saw was Liam. He stepped forward slowly, each stride deliberate, his dress blue sharp in the morning light. When he stopped before her, he dropped to one knee beside her wheelchair. His eyes, usually so composed, now shimmered with unshed tears. Hi, Mom, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry I couldn't be here sooner, but I needed to make sure today wasn't just about what they did to you in there. It's about everything you've done for us, for all of us. Emily reached for his hand, and he squeezed hers with the steadiness of a soldier, but the tenderness of a son. Then he stood and turned to address the crowd that had begun to gather on both sides of the street. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice firm, clear, and unwavering. This is Corporal Emily Carter, my mother, my hero, and the reason I joined the Army. He paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. My mother served 3 tours as a combat medic. She didn't just patch wounds, she saved lives. 17 of them, to be exact. And when the explosion hit, she shielded 2 wounded soldiers with her body, knowing full well she might not survive. That blast took her legs, but it didn't take her spirit. It didn't take her courage. And it sure as hell didn't take her place in this country's heart. Gasps and quiet murmurs rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned in, recording every word. From the diner's entrance, patrons spilled out, including Benny himself, wiping his eyes with a dish towel. Too many times, Liam continued, we allow our heroes to fade into the background. We fail to honor the sacrifices made for our freedom. But not today. Today we honor her the way she should have been all along. He turned and gestured to a tall officer beside him. Colonel James Patterson stepped forward, holding a black velvet box and an official-looking document. By order of the Secretary of the Army, he declared Corporal Emily Carter is hereby awarded the Army Commendation Medal for Valor. In addition, she is appointed as an honorary advisor to the Army's Wounded Warrior Program for her bravery, her leadership, and her enduring commitment to every soldier who follows in her footsteps. The soldiers behind them snapped to a unified salute. Liam did the same. Emily, trembling, accepted the medal as tears rolled down her cheeks. She had faced enemy fire without flinching, but this wave of recognition and love nearly undid her. As Liam knelt again beside her, he whispered, "You don't have to prove anything anymore, Mom. Not to them, not to anyone." Nearby, Brad Wallace, the once sneering college student, stood motionless at the edge of the crowd. His face was pale, eyes wide with remorse. Whatever he had once thought of her, he now understood the magnitude of what he had mocked. Benny approached next, gently tapping Liam's shoulder. "We've got something else to show you," he said, voice quivering. "Follow me." Emily turned her chair, escorted by the soldiers back into the diner. A new plaque had been mounted above her regular table. It read, "Reserved for Corporal Emily Carter. Hero, Mother Patriot." Below it, a small shelf held her folded challenge coin and the Army Commendation Medal in a glass frame. On the opposite wall, Sarah, one of the waitresses, had begun assembling a wall of honor already filled with photos of local veterans, Emily's portrait the first among them. The crowd, the cameras, even the staff all watched in reverent silence. No one needed to speak. The town of Cedar Falls had changed. The diner was no longer just a breakfast stop. It had become a sanctuary of remembrance and a living tribute to those who served with quiet courage and unwavering dignity. And at the center of it all sat Emily Carter, no longer invisible, no longer broken, but whole again, honored, remembered, and finally home. 5 years had passed since that unforgettable morning at Benny's Diner, but for Corporal Emily Carter, the memory remained as vivid as the day her son Liam and his unit had turned a moment of humiliation into a lifetime of healing. Time had not erased the pain of her past, but it had transformed it into purpose. Today, Emily wasn't just a survivor. She was a national voice, a symbol of resilience, and the founder of Wheels of Courage, a nonprofit that helped disabled veterans reclaim their dignity and fight against the stigma that so often followed them home. On the 5th anniversary of that morning, Emily returned to the diner not in uniform, but surrounded by family, her son Liam, his wife, and in Emily's arms, a baby girl named Hope, her first grandchild, her legacy. The diner had changed too. What once was a place of quiet judgment now stood proudly as a haven for veterans. The Wall of Honor had expanded, filled with photos and letters from soldiers past and present. A bronze plaque near the door read, "This establishment proudly stands with our veterans. Because of them, we are free." Emily sat in her old booth, her wheelchair now flanked by a walker someone else had left behind, a reminder that battles don't end with war. A young waitress brought her coffee with a quiet thank you, and a group of high school students at the counter nodded respectfully. The same town that once turned its head now stood beside her. She looked at baby Hope and smiled, brushing a soft curl from the infant's forehead. "You'll never have to fight the same battles I did," she whispered, "because we made sure the world sees people like me for who we are, not what we've lost." That's the lesson we all must carry. Real strength isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. It's about refusing to let others define your worth based on your scars. Emily's story reminds us that dignity cannot be taken. It must be defended, sometimes quietly, sometimes fiercely, but always with courage. If this story moved you, leave a comment below sharing the name of a veteran you admire. Hit like if you believe respect should never be optional. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that honor those who've given everything so we could live freely. Because heroes don't just wear uniforms. Sometimes they roll quietly into diners carrying a lifetime of battles and still find the strength to smile.